Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Short and to the Point with Jess Kleinschmidt on the Comeback and Awful Announcing. So excited for this guest. I say that a lot, but you know why? Because I'm excited about all my guests. I'm also excited for you to be tuning in. Very thankful once again for you to be returning. I have a very versatile guest. And you know why I say versatile? Because he has been involved in just about every sport you could imagine. Adam Amin, he's the voice of the Chicago Cubs for NBC Sports Chicago. You also see him all over Fox for NFL and Major League Baseball, and shares a booth with everyone you could imagine. Every famous name in each sport definitely has shared a booth with him, and they respect the hell out of him as well, which is part of the reason why I wanted to pick his brain, because as modest as he is, he shares the booth with Hall of Famers like John Smoltz, and he's shared a booth with Pat McAfee before, and they look up to him. They want to learn from him, which is definitely a cool thing to see. He also once did coverage for the famous Nathan's hot dog eating contest, so I picked his brain about that as well, because how do you prep to watch Joey Chestnut just hose a bunch of hot dogs? He gives us the secret behind all of that. So without further ado, here is my chat with Adam Amin. My guest today is a good friend of mine. Versatility is his middle name. I'm sure it's not actually your middle name, but that's okay. But Adam, thanks for coming on to Short and to the Point.
I feel like it's an appropriate title for myself as well, so I'm happy to be on.
I know people ask me why I titled it. I was like, well, when you meet me in person and I'm this big and you have a conversation with me that never actually stops, then you'll understand. But I'm so excited to have you on. First and foremost, you know, you and I had the exact same dream when we were little, where we wanted to be baseball players, and that kind of shifted over time. But from what I hear, the play-by-play, the broadcasting wasn't exactly in your sights as far as a future career. So tell me about the transition from wanting to be a baseball player, which we all go through, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah, I started catching when I was basically could stand up and put equipment on. My brother was my coach when I was a kid, so he bought me all the equipment, and I would work with him every day. He was throwing 65 miles an hour at me when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And that was a lot to handle, but I got really good at it. I was a really, really good defensive catcher, and I just loved baseball. And I'd, like a lot of us have, done in our youth, whatever our team is, might happen to be the Cubs growing up. When Rick Wilkins would come up to the plate as a catcher, I would have my Cubs shirt on and my hat, and my brother would yell from the basement, "Hey, you're up." And I would run downstairs and make sure, to play out the at-bat just like it was going on TV. Rick Wilkins was not a particularly good hitter, so I got used to the idea of striking out a lot, which has served me well in my career and in my life. But I played all the way through, junior high and travel ball and all that. And then I got to high school, and everybody else was just bigger and could hit a curveball, and I could not do those things. I was really good defensively, could not hit a lick. And when you get to that point, you kind of realize very fast that, well, maybe this isn't for you. So kind of get away from baseball for a few years and, started to do more performance-based things. I was in theater. I was a musician, played the violin from the time I was 7 years old. I was in musical theater and choir and all that good stuff, and really loved it and really enjoyed it, but still missed sports and still loved baseball. So when I got to college, one of the reasons I went to Valparaiso University in Indiana was because a friend of mine was going there, and he said, if you want to try broadcasting, which I'd messed around with in high school a little bit, kind of the combination of sports and theater, so to speak, sports and kind of theatricality. And that's kind of what broadcasting essentially is. So he said, if you want to try that, come here, I'll put you on the air right away. And we'll make sure that, you get a chance to call some baseball. And that's what I ended up doing when I was a freshman in college. I remember taking the drive down to Indiana State with Ken Levica, who's still one of my good friends and is the play-by-play announcer for Florida Atlantic for their football and basketball teams, and made that long drive and saw Valparaiso lose 9-0 and called the middle 3 innings of that game. And Indiana State scored all 9 runs in those middle 3 innings. And I was like, this is pretty fun. I would like to keep doing this. And that's when I was hooked. I was hooked from there.
You mentioned, I don't want to dumb down the transition for them to say, oh, we're just going to put you on a broadcast. And you did these 3 innings. What were the emotions like? Because I feel like when you get into it, you have this mentality of this is what it's going to be like, but that's not the reality. What was it like to be introduced to it as quickly as you were?
You kind of get tossed in and your nerves are on fire, just
Uh-huh.
about anything. Yeah, and I understand that the stakes of this are significantly lower than other things that have people's nerves on fire for obviously more important and more impactful reasons. But for me, it was like every part of my body was like, don't screw this up, don't screw this up, don't look stupid. And most of what we do, the preparation, the research, taking lessons or whatever it may be that some people that, I've had friends of mine take voice lessons. I've had friends of mine take lessons to how to work in front of a camera and things of that nature. And all of a sudden, you're wondering, why am I doing this? Well, it's to not look stupid and to not
Right.
sound stupid. Like it's a big
Yeah.
fear for all of us, right? Like any one of us who do this in any capacity, we're just afraid of people looking at us and going, you shouldn't be doing this because you're dumb or you're stupid or you're not good at it or whatever. And all of those anxieties were on display physically, and they definitely were emotionally at that point. And once you get through it, it's obviously never that bad. And again, very low stakes at that time anyways, but it felt like it. And when you get done with it, you go, that was a rush. That was a really cool rush. And that's a rush that I'd be willing to experience again and again. And it becomes a little almost substance like in how fun it can be and how good it makes you feel, or the release and the kind of the euphoria that you feel when you finish up.
These broadcasts are your drug of choice.
Yeah, pretty much. This is an addicting thing when you get to go to a real ballpark and hear crowds and see them and hear them react, and you get to caption that. That does become kind of an addictive nature. It's got an addictive nature to it. So.
Well, you mentioned the anxieties, and I feel as time goes on and your career has progressed, so have the opportunities. So have those anxieties, do they still come around? The nerves still go around? And then do you still have that same mentality when it's over? Like, that wasn't that bad.
The latter for sure. It's never that
Mhm.
bad. It's
Yeah.
fun. It's a great thing that we are fortunate enough to do. And yeah, it's never bad. It's always fun. The former, the first part of that, those haven't ever really gone away. I think the anxieties of doing this, and not they've shifted how they've felt. It's definitely different how it feels now compared to 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago when I, kind of really first started doing this. And it used to be a fear, and it's more so now this nervous, fun energy, and you kind of use it. You learn how to harness it in a way, or it just becomes a part of the routine of that day. Like, oh, the nerves are coming in. It must be close to time to get on the air and to do your open or to start calling the game or whatever it is. So they've shifted over time, but they've never really gone away.
Was it easy for you to harness those emotions?
I think doing the job as much as I have, like doing the like going through the process of this has made it easier. I tell people a lot, like one of my two of my really good friends are in this business, Joe Davis and Wayne Randazzo. And Joe is obviously the voice of the World Series at Fox, and Wayne is the voice of the Los Angeles Angels, and was the New York Mets radio guy, or one of the Mets radio guys for a long time, and does the Apple TV broadcasts on Friday night. And both of them I've known for, the better part of 15 years now at this point, but I listen to them and watch them, and I've watched them grow. And I just thought to myself when we were younger, like, how are you this good, or how is your presence this easy? And it just feels like you haven't had to do a whole lot of it. Like, you're so young and you're so good at this already. And I know that they've worked really, really hard. They've worked harder than just about anybody I know, but it just felt like it was easier for them. And for me, I'm a reps guy. I just had to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. It becomes muscle memory at one point, for somebody like me, to make sure that I have a mechanism and a process, and my brain knows where to go and what to say when this thing happens. And the more I do it, the better I get at it. But I think that's part of the reason it's become easier to harness it, is just because I've done it a lot. So
Yeah.
that's what I needed to do. I don't think I would have been nearly as good as I feel like I've become over time if I didn't have all those reps to try to, create that skeletal structure and that muscle memory eventually.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned the reps, but like you also have this specific process. And I remember you talking about it when you said, I could have 24 hours to conduct or prep for a game or a situation, an event. What is your prep process like? Is it the same thing every single time? Have you strayed away from it? How has that benefited you in sticking to that regime?
I think because of the amount of games, the volume, like, really for the better part of the last, 12 years, I've been right around 100 or more games a year, somewhere between 90 and 110 games pretty much every year for the better part of that time period. So, kind of creating the process and then honing it and adjusting it. And as time goes, you streamline a little bit of it. Like, it's definitely changed, but it took a while to kind of get to that point. And, football has the longest process for me, just
Mhm.
in terms of all the goalposts and check marks you have to hit. It's, how do you start this long process of covering 100 and some odd players, 106 players essentially every weekend? And to give a little context, somebody asked me, like, how much do you write? Like, how much research do you have to do? So I copied and pasted everything from my spotting charts that you create. A lot of football broadcasters have these charts that they make or that are given to them, and they take notes on them. And I do my own. I type them out. So I copied and pasted everything from my charts, and then copied and pasted everything from like the notes that I take over the course of the week, and put it into like a regular Word document, and did the classic college 12-point font, double space, Times New Roman. And you just kind of see what it ends up being. And it's close to about 50 pages every single week. So you're basically writing a 40 to 50 page term paper or
Mhm.
thesis every single week to try to get ready for a football game. And it's a little less for basketball because there's just significantly fewer players. There's, about a fifth of the players that you're covering. Baseball is a little bit tougher than that because it's so cumulative. There's so many games, and you just want to be able to know what some scouting reports have said on some of the younger guys, what the heavy sluggers have done over the course of the last couple of weeks, or where did they start and where are they now, and where they've been in comparison to where they're at right now. You're just trying to create kind of contextual points when it comes to baseball because it's so cumulative. So all those three sports have different processes, but they've been changed and honed over time, and they're still pretty much the same. Like, now that I feel comfortable with it, I kind of know each week, for a national baseball game, what are the checkpoints that I need to hit. I'm never going to know everything that the local guys know, that the local broadcasters know, but that's why we, go in and pick their brains. I hadn't seen the Orioles all season long. So I texted Kevin Brown in September, and I went into Melanie Newman's radio booth, and I said, what's going on with you guys? And if I can do anything for you, obviously I'll help out the other team. But, like, you pick the brains of the people who are in the know and who are smarter than you and know more than you and have done more research and have lived with the team. And I know what that's like being a broadcaster for a team in the NBA. I get those texts and I get those phone calls and I get those messages, and I'm always happy and willing to share because people do that for me. So we try to make this as a collaborative of a process and as honed in of a process as we can be.
I appreciate the Melanie Newman name drop very much. You were talking about the balance, and that's kind of interesting with these three different sports. What was it like at the beginning of trying to balance it all? Did you feel like, oh, I mastered this sport, let me introduce another one? Did you go in just taking it all and just like praying for the best? What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was a lot of praying for the best. A
Okay.
lot when I first got hired at ESPN, this was in 2011, and I initially got hired to do some college football, but mostly like a bunch of college basketball just because there are so many teams and so many games. But I was kind of slated to do college volleyball. I was asked to do the NCAA wrestling championships. I was going to do college baseball and college softball, mostly because these are all sports that I'd covered. When I was coming up before I had gotten hired there, I did a lot of freelance TV work, some very low level productions around the state of Illinois, around the Midwest, and kind of driving to places, doing a lot of Division II stuff. And I covered tennis and softball. I did the Division II World Series, the Division II tennis championships, the Division II basketball Elite Eight. I did the Horizon League volleyball tournament. I played volleyball in high school after I'd stopped playing baseball. So that was like the niche sport that I knew. I covered high school wrestling when I was in Iowa, my first full-time job
It's
out of
big there, right?
it's huge. Like Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska. These are states, the plain states and around the Midwest, they really take that stuff seriously. And in Illinois, they take volleyball very seriously. So these are sports that I was exposed to and that I called a lot of. So when I got hired at ESPN, part of the reason they hired me was when they asked me, well, what have you done? I listed off all these things along with baseball and basketball and football, things that are a little bit more, I guess, mainstream, for lack of a better term. I felt comfortable being able to say, I can do all these things. Now I need some work on some of these things. I need to learn more, but I can do them if you need somebody to do them. So they tossed all this stuff right out of the gate pretty much at me. So I was doing 5 or 6 different sports when I first got hired at ESPN. And that's kind of what I had done in college. And that's kind of what I had done in my previous job, plus covering minor league baseball. So the expectation was, well, just
Do it all.
go do it all. And I tried to do my very best at all of it. And I got tossed various things. Here, do this water polo match, do the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, and figure out how to make this a thing and how to make it sound professional, but like you're having fun, and like try to find the balance of that. And it was a great training ground. If nothing else, it was an outstanding, early test to see how you respond to kind of, again, not adversity. It'd be a stupid way to refer to it in my head now, but just here's some hurdles to kind of leap over and see how you react to them. And I think that was it was a great conditioning test for me over the course of those first 5-6 years working at ESPN.
Was there regret telling them that you could do everything? Because as far as the workload goes, was it overwhelming?
I don't regret it, but it's easy to not regret things when it worked out okay. Like in hindsight, it was the very best thing for me. And for somebody who has been fairly uncomfortable for most of his life, I think I've never really been, or hadn't really been, comfortable in my own skin for a long time. And when that happens, or when you're that type of person, you just have a tendency to sit in it. Just be like, well, this is who I am. I'm an uncomfortable person, and I'm awkward, and I'm shy, and I'm not going to really be, I'm not really going to challenge myself, because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're just like, well, it's not going to work out, so I might as well not even try. And I'm glad that work, the career, the dream of the job was enough to force me to say, you better get out of your comfort zone, because if you don't, you're not really going to impress anybody enough to have them trust you to do the things that you really want to do in the future. So I think, I definitely wasn't thinking about it in that moment exactly like how I'm able to, verbalize it now, but those elements were all there. It was a lot of like, get out of your comfort zone. Like, you have to do this. You're about to be thrown on TV. You better sound like you know what you're doing, because again, it goes back to that insecurity of like, I don't want to look stupid in front of people. So I did all the research I could, and I asked all the people that I could find that knew what they were talking about. Talk to me like I'm an idiot, and teach me and tell me what you think I should be talking about. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to try to make those things the key talking points, so that the audience that's coming in, maybe like me as a casual fan, or an unknowing fan, or an unknowing person who's just stumbling upon this, I'm going to explain it to you the way it was explained to me, so that you feel like you have a grasp of it just the same way that these very, very smart people told me, so that I would have a grasp on it.
When did you start embracing the fact that you were uncomfortable and awkward? Because it sounds like your comfortability was sprouted from you embracing the fact that you were uncomfortable.
I think part of it is when you realize like it's okay to make a joke about yourself on the air. Like, I think my personality on the air was a little bit more gregarious, and I don't lie to people and say that's exactly the type of person I am. And I definitely don't lie to them now and say exactly who I am on the air is exactly who I am off. It's not. There's a show where we're entertainers in a sense, or at least we're the carnival barkers, I guess, for the actual show, right? The actual show is the games, and we're the people who are introducing those things to you. So my personality on the air isn't necessarily the same as it is off the air. I'm more comfortable being, more low key off the air, and kind of I don't find myself making a lot of jokes off the air. Just hanging around with people that I've just met. Whereas on TV, you're talking to millions of strangers potentially who have never seen you before, and you're going to make some kind of comment or make some joke or make some remark that you hope lands and makes them laugh a little bit. And then hopefully they'll be more open and receptive to you giving them information that is necessary and pertinent impression to what you're, the game that you're talking about. So when I figured out that it's okay to be the same. You don't have to be this big gregarious personality at all times.
Mhm.
I'm also lucky that I've worked with a lot of people who are more gregarious and have big personalities. So I'm more comfortable being the point man for them to set them up and make them feel good. And I think I'm a good like foil to that.
Yeah.
I can play that's my personality. And when I realized that, and it took a long time, it took 10 years, 11 years, 12 years of doing this on TV to finally figure out that that's okay. And that's who I am. And I don't really want to change that much as I get older. I think that's when it happened. I think that's when it started to become a little bit more easy and it started to become a little bit more comfortable.
I love that. And you kind of touched on it. You kind of set up for the analyst in the booth with you. And most of the time, that's going to be a former player who's spent many years playing. Where does the selflessness lie? I feel like there's a lot of ego in this industry. You let that other person not necessarily always story tell, but let them be themselves. There's chemistry involved. How did you kind of surrender and let them tell the story or be themselves and kind of push away and let them have their platform for a little bit?
Yeah, I want the people next to me to feel good. I want them to feel like this is their space, because at the end of the day, especially on television, it's still, you know, among the broadcasters, it's still an analyst medium.
Mhm.
I really feel like, the great broadcasts that I listen to and that I watch and that, fans seemingly really respond to and appreciate. I think, the analyst has to be the one to deliver the credibility. Their credibility trickles down to everybody else. And that's an important, technical piece, I think, for any broadcast, for any good broadcast, to remember that this is the person who's been in that moment, uh,
Mhm.
been in those tough spots, and they've been in situations like this or exactly like the one that you're watching right now. And their insight can be invaluable in those moments. And I work really hard to be. I know I'm not, but I work really hard to try to be the smartest guy in the room
Mhm.
and not tell anybody about it. Like I think
I
it's
like
easy
that.
it's easy
Yeah.
to see people that are really, really smart, but they're trying to bludgeon you over the head with it. And I don't want to be that person. I want to be your safety net, right? So if something crazy happens, I've got the information to make sure you understand what's happening. If a crazy thing happens, rule related or situationally or whatever it may be, I want to be the person that's your safety net to let you know, hey, if you're confused about something, I'll explain it. But when the game is the thing that we're there to document first and foremost, the person next to me is typically going to be the person that knows best. And the best broadcast relationships I've had going back to my time at ESPN, and whether it was working with Amanda Scarborough on the Women's World Series or Rebecca Lobo and Carol Lawson on the Final Four or Dusty Dvorak on college football or whatever it may be. I think the best partnerships I've had are the ones where I give them the space to really do what they do best, and that's talk about the game that they love and played and experienced firsthand. And they reciprocate that by giving me the space necessary in the biggest moments to then show what my job is, like to make the big call, to, accentuate the big play with our commentary or with a good play-by-play call. I tell young broadcasters all the time, there's only 5 to 10 really, really big moments for a play-by-play announcer in any given game that you have to be perfect. And that's
Mhm.
not necessarily a call of a play.
Right.
It's usually several calls of plays, but it's also that one key rule explanation that you have to make sure you're on top of, or a really good setup to your analysts so that they can go into a topic that they really want, or maybe you set them up on a replay that they really feel strongly about. There's a rollout to break showing, slow motion shots of the players and coaches, and you have a great line that takes you to break. There's only 5 to 10 of those moments per broadcast. And the rest of the time, your job is to be palatable, meaning, can I listen to this person for 2.5 to 4 hours?
Yeah.
Be accurate informationally, make sure the things that you are saying and you've researched are correct, and to sound like you're having a good time with the person that you're standing next to. And I think if we can accomplish those few things, those handful of things, the broadcast will always be better for it. And the analyst still has to be at the forefront of it.
When at the point of your career did you find the balance of all of those things that you listed and said, these are the things that you need to make a good broadcast?
I mean, I still struggle with it at times. It fluctuates week to week sometimes. And,
Yeah.
I spent the last month plus working with, a different football partner. I
Mhm.
went off and did baseball playoffs for Fox and then came back to the NFL. and I was on a different crew. Our buddy Joe was doing the league championship series and the World Series. So I was filling in on his crew for a month and working with a different analyst. And then this past week, I went back to my regular crew and worked with my normal analyst, Mark Schlereth, and just getting back into the rhythm of things. It's still like a week to week thing sometimes. Like I have to remember, what are Mark's quirks and what are the things that Mark likes to talk about? How do I accentuate the things that he really likes to talk about? It's, 1 week I work with John Smoltz, and 1 week I work with Eric Karros, and 1 week I work with AJ Przinsky, and then we do all these games together. Oh, and then by the way, Adam Wainwright's going to join you for the postseason. Yeah. So that's an adjustment that both AJ and I have to make. But it's, I think all of us have the idea of just what's going to make the best broadcast. And as long as we can remind ourselves of that, and I can remind myself of that as the tone setter of the broadcast, then being conscientious of these things is half the battle to solving them when you actually have to face them on air.
One of the best broadcasts I've ever seen, I'm not just sucking up to you, is when you had Wainwright with you. And it was the perfect marriage of like the little kid in me who watched these guys play, me being your friend watching you. We learned something because Wainwright taught us about a pitch, right? So it was just like a really cool thing that is so hard to do over a baseball broadcast.
Yeah.
And it seemed natural. It just kind of occurred. Were you surprised about the feedback and the love that you got from that? Just like the quick little clip of that?
I was a little surprised. I was a little taken aback. And I think the response that I saw the most from, we're big fans of Rob at Pitching Ninja, and, big fans of a lot of great beat writers, that we read over the course of a season that cover their teams or cover the national beat. And a lot of the people that I would look at for information or look to for information, they were the ones responding back and saying, this is how we could, these are the types of things that really make it fun to learn about, this is what we want to hear from our analysts. This is what we want to see. And we don't want it to be, looking back constantly. We want to see what makes the game great and what's now and what's coming ahead, what's forward now. And obviously Adam being in the game, he literally had just retired a couple of weeks prior.
Like walked off the field and went up there pretty much. Yeah.
And again, now he had been with us before, right? That was the third time that the three of us had worked together on a broadcast for the postseason on a series. But, it's coming straight in, and we knew it was it. We knew this was his last run this season, and then he jumped in with us. And I think he can be a little bit more open now, because, all right, I don't have to suck. He made the joke on the air. It's like, I don't have to suck up to the umpires anymore because I don't have to get a call from that guy. So I'm not going to call him out on live TV 2 years ago, but now it's a little bit different. And I was just really happy with how comfortable he felt. I was really pleased with how AJ handles it. It would be easy for AJ to say, well, this stinks. I work all season and I work with Adam, and, we formulate this partnership, and now Waino is going to jump in. And no, there's none of that. There was no ego with any of us. And Adam just is as good of a partner as there is. He wants to be very good at this, and he wants to be a great teammate on TV, just as he was as a player. So I think giving him that space, seeing what the response was, and seeing how when you project the game forward and approach it with that same attitude, I think fans really appreciate that, and that's not to say that looking back is a bad thing. It's not. But I do feel like giving people a sense of exactly what it is to be there right now, how you're taking in the information that's new to these players and how they're applying it, especially somebody like Waino, who's in his early 40s and is now making these adjustments. We're watching Justin Verlander pitch in a playoff game. Nobody can understand that better than Waino, a guy who's kind of defying, the standards of time when it comes to the game of baseball as a pitcher. So we wanted to give him that space, and I was really pleased with how he took it, how AJ ran with it too, how our crew tried to approach it. And I was really pleased with the response, because these guys deserve that. Though they deserve to have that praise heaped upon them for doing the job well, to do it right.
It checked all the boxes. It was just awesome. People that didn't even like baseball, which there are a lot of them, really appreciated it. And I think it was cool to have all the different elements combined to make a really good segment. And it was just beautifully done and just so organic, which was really impressive as well. There was no forcing there. I could geek over that all day. But when you're talking about a guy like Waino or anybody else, you're watching them play the game one moment, and then you look to the left, look to the right, what have you, and they're sharing a booth with you. Is that ever intimidating, or do you think they're more intimidated by you?
I find it hard to believe that anybody would be intimidated by me. I really do.
No, I've heard some people talk like, even on the McAfee interview, they were kind of like, "You're really good." Like, it was kind of, I can't believe I was sharing a booth with Adam. Like, that does happen. I don't want you to be modest. That does happen.
It's just hard to picture it. I love that that's the case, and I hope that comes from a place of like, we like this guy's work and we appreciate what he does. So, it can be a little bit jarring to actually, work with the person. I hope that's how it comes off, but it's just hard to imagine it. Right. And I think you and I are very similar in that regard. Like, well, little old me, like this is, this whole thing, like,
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I'm usually the person that's more intimidated. Now, as time has gone on, less and less so. Again, I feel more comfortable, as we talked about, just I'm more comfortable in my own skin, which makes it easier to be comfortable with other people. And I've never really been starstruck by any means. Like, I've never really felt that. I think the job has kind of conditioned me to not be starstruck or to be intimidated by, or to be, kind of flabbergasted by somebody's career or something like that. Because when we're teammates, we are colleagues. But like, listen, when John Smoltz walks in the first time, and the first time I work with him, it's like, man, I grew up watching this guy. The first time I worked with AJ in person was during the postseason. Remember, I started at Fox during COVID, so we were doing all these games out of studio. So the first time I'd actually worked with both AJ and Waino in person was in a playoff series in an empty, Minute Maid Park doing the National League Division Series. But like, it took a little while to get comfortable with that. But I definitely think I'm the person who would be more intimidated by, a person's resume, partially because the reason I love sports and why I have fun doing the job, it's fun to see, beings of the same species do crazy physical things that you can't do, like I think that's part of the reason we all love sports so much. Like, I can't hit a baseball 400 feet, or I can't throw a football 60 yards. I can't dunk a basketball. I like being able to see human beings do cool physical things, and to do them within this structure, and to see how amazed people are constantly by it. So I allow myself to be amazed by the things that we see. And I think that kind of folds in with seeing some of these impressive athletes, and whether the emotional connectivity of it is more intensified, right? If you watch these players growing up, or you came up watching these guys. Like, I watched AJ in Chicago winning a World Series for the Sox. My partner on the NBA is Stacey King, and I was a huge Bulls fan growing up. So watching him win 3 championships for the team I loved, and then getting to work with him for the first time, 5 years ago, is, that it was intimidating at first. But again, he and I became great friends. Eventually we became full-time partners. AJ and Waino have become great buddies of mine. Waino's a football freak. So anytime I have a game that's on, and he happens to be flipping it on, he texts me. AJ was at EDC in Orlando and was texting me from there and sending me photos. Like, these guys they've become friends of mine. And that certainly takes away some of the intimidation factor, which I think is awesome.
And what about the competition factor too? Because you mentioned it yourself, like, Waino wants to be good. That doesn't escape these guys. Do you notice that when it comes to the broadcast and the media perspective as well?
I think so. And I think the ones who are the best at this are the ones who are competitive and want to be great at it. Now, again, how that manifests itself, I imagine, is a lot different in media than it was as a player, right? Like, there's no scoreboard for the most part at the end of the day when you're doing this job. A lot of this has to be subjective and self-reflective, and seeking out the sources that you feel comfortable with for feedback, and how to get better at this when there is no true tangible result. Unlike a game where the scoreboard tells you what happened. I think the best broadcasters, the best analysts in particular, are the ones who are competitive and know how to motivate themselves to be great. They're the ones who will watch games and will watch other people and say, that was good. I don't like how that sounded. Let me see if I can implement that in my own voice. And that's how play-by-play announcers are too. That's how I started. When you don't really know how to do the job, you look at the people who do know how to do it, and you crib note basically from everybody. And I imagine as a writer, as a broadcaster, you've probably done the same. All of us have. We just look at the people that we know or are close to or look up to and say, well, how does this person do it? I'm going to kind of copy this in some form or fashion, and then figure out how it's going to apply to my voice. And as my comfort gets higher and higher, how it's going to sound more like me rather than them. But there's always elements of that there. So I think the best analysts, best play-by-play announcers, the best writers, everybody kind of wants to be great, figures out who is great, and figures out what the blueprint needs to be for them to be able to, figure out how to be great at it. And Wayno's like that. AJ's like that. I really can feel that from those guys, and they want to be, they want to do the job right. And that, speaks to volumes about them as what type of players they were, what type of commentators they are now, what type of teammates they are for us.
Yeah, it's really kind of cool to watch those guys transition. And you're always kind of curious. Like, I've covered a lot of guys who retired, and you're like, are they going to go the media route? Are they going to go the coaching route? And it's always kind of nice to see them transition. And a lot of times we're left pleasantly surprised, and that's always great to see.
I imagine you kind of have that. You covered Mark this year, Kotze, and then Stephen Vogt, headed over to Cleveland to become their manager. Like, I imagine you feel that a little bit right now. You probably felt it this past year, these last couple of years, and you probably feel it now with Stephen.
You know what I was thinking of with Vogt? I was shocked that he didn't go media heavy, but then I realized as a manager, you're being both a manager and a media darling in its own right. So he gets both. And to take over for another media darling like Tito is great. Plus, I made him cry 5 times when he retired. You can't find that on a Baseball Reference page.
No, absolutely.
And one thing that was interesting, and I noticed it when the A's, when they were making their wild card runs a few years back, you would see ESPN pop up. And I don't want to say out of nowhere, that's just how the coverage goes. And you mentioned it a little bit. How do you make local fans happy when you're on a national broadcast, or is that possible?
I think it's possible, but never fully. Not everybody, is going to be happy about it. And part of that is just they're going to come in saying, I don't care. I don't care who it is. I don't care which broadcaster it is. I don't like them. That's how some people are going to be. And it's more prevalent in baseball than any other sport. And the reason is obvious. It's pure volume. It's pure numbers. It's twice the length of a hockey or basketball season. And the games typically, although obviously this year that it changed a little bit, but still for the most part, the games are longer. So you are just straight up spending more time with your broadcast team. And no matter what, you will not make the entire local market happy. And that's something you just kind of have to accept as a national baseball announcer. Now, the ways that I feel like I've worked to mitigate that somewhat, I think we have a tendency on the national side to go too big picture. And I think the more kind of local we can make it feel, especially like game to game, I think the better off we are. And again, our job, frankly, if we prepare properly and research properly, I think the national baseball job is a little bit easier because we're not deep diving on every single aspect of the organization. But the big thing for me is to try to be as recent as possible. And you were asking about process earlier, Jess, and I've changed my baseball process the last couple of years to really try to focus in on during the regular season, at least on that week. What's happening that week and the prior week. What's really happened the last 3 or 4 series, because that's the stuff that's freshest in the minds of local fans too. And then if you can connect those dots to some of the overarching storylines that a team comes in with at the beginning of the season, then great. But you're never going to know as much as the local people do, obviously. And again, I know that I am a local guy. So I see it. I see fans of the Bulls complaining when they are on national TV. Well, this broadcast doesn't know or whatever. And I'm like, guys, it's just not the same. It's not that's the point. It's supposed to be the national perspective. I think the one thing that upsets me is the word bias. I think that's what frustrates me as a national broadcaster.
I was going to ask you about that too. It's something that your job as a national broadcaster when it comes to being biased or unbiased.
Yeah. And I think as I've thought about these things more often, I've come to realize that there is no such thing as an objective broadcast, because the game itself is not objective, especially when you're only coming in for one. You're coming in for that one game, you're parachuting in, or even just for that one series. You're just covering the ebbs and flows of that day and of that series. You're not there to frame everything in the perspective of, like we did Astros Twins. It's not my job to frame everything in the perspective of an Astros fan who, when they watch Todd and Blummer on, a Tuesday in June, everything is framed in the context of, well, how does this affect the team that you watch 150 times a year, 140 times, 130 times with your broadcast crew? Like, that's their job. They're doing their job properly. And we're trying to do our job properly by just covering the ebbs and flows of what happens that day. And when it is 1 out of 162, or it does get boiled down to a 5 or 7 game series, it's really hard to convince people that, well, you're not biased against the team. I am biased towards the score and towards the waves of the game. If a team is playing really, really well, we're probably going to talk about them. If a team has 7 batters come up in 4 out of the 9 innings that they're up at the plate, of course the game's going to be biased, because the time that we're going to spend talking about that is going to be significantly more than the time we spend talking about the other team, because they're not on offense. They're not bringing up multiple players that we can discuss and connect dots to for story after story. It just doesn't happen. That's how the game gets covered when you're coming in from that parachuting perspective. And it's hard for fans, and it's not their job to know this, but it's hard for fans to contextualize that. And I can appreciate that. It gets a little bit frustrating when I keep explaining myself, but when I do explain myself, I think fans do understand it. I've interacted with people and said, hey, I get where you're coming from. Here's why it sounds this way. I gave you the psychological reason because of your connectivity to your own broadcast team, and I gave you the mechanical reason for us just covering what happens in those particular 9 innings or those 45 innings in a 5-game series. That's how we have to do the job.
So it sounds like they're embracing that.
I think you have to, and again, like you said, to appeal to the local market, you try as much as you can to literally fall into the bushes that, you're advancing through over the course of that season. That field that you're advancing through that season, you try to plop yourself right in that spot, between game 140 and 142. You're there for game 141. I will try to give you as much as I can as to what's happened from game 130 to game 140, because that's what you're probably thinking about most. And I'll try to connect it to the beginning of the year as best as we can, but trying to keep it where the game is at. It's a little bit different for baseball than it is for football or jumping in on an NBA broadcast in the national scope.
It always makes you think there's a wild card game, and I look up and there's an ESPN flag. A-Rod's next to me. Buster Olney's talking to Bo Mel, and I'm like, where were you guys all season? Where were you during June when all the guys were crying? And then after I let that go, and then I started being part of national broadcast, I understood it. And you don't want to be phony, right? As somebody who's covering a different game, because you have to understand where they're coming from. But I'm glad that they're embracing it. Yeah. Last couple of questions, and I'll let you go. You had to cover a hot dog eating contest. How does one not only prep for that, but also cover that?
I did 2 of them, and I covered them and I prepped for them almost as a hot
dog reference page that you can look at.
There is an organization, a governing body, believe it or not, of competitive eating in this country. It's called Major League Eating. That's a real thing. Major League Eating. And they keep track of all the records of all the competitions that take place over a season. And for all the competitors, we got a chance to meet a handful of them, and we get the list of participants in these contests. And I go, all right, well, here's the 20 people that I need to know, the 10 women and 10 men in these 2 competitions. Let's put together a chart. And I took my basketball charts that I've done for the NBA for the last several years, and I just stacked up all the competitors based on their ranking. Instead of a number next to them, like their jersey number, I put their ranking. And it's like, 1, Joey Chestnut. And let's put all of our Joey Chestnut information into that same slot, just like we would for, Steph Curry. Like, we're just going to put all the notes there, and I'm going to put some numbers and stats for some records that he has. And we'll try to just be able to tell his story in, the 5 to 10 sentences that we feel are important for that day on the 4th of July when he comes in and he's the favorite. And then for Matt Stoney and for Jeffrey Esper and for everybody, for Mickey Sudo and for every other competitor that comes in, like, we're just kind of, I at least approached it the same way. And when I left ESPN and my friend Mike Golick Jr. was doing it, he was taking over on the hot dog contest. I sent him my charts and said, maybe this will help. Like, it made it a little bit easier for us. And just structuring it in a way that I was familiar with, that I was comfortable with, made the process of doing something completely new significantly easier. And I had some historic notes, and I had, the history of the location, just like I do when I go to Fenway Park and I'm writing down oldest ballpark in Major League Baseball. Here's it's 37 feet for the Green Monster, and here's the pesky pole. And I'm writing down all these little quirks, just like you would for a ballpark or a stadium or a city. Anytime I do an NFL game, I have notes on the stadium and the city itself. So when we show a shot of downtown Minneapolis, I can say discovered with the Dakota Sioux in the 17th century. We're, in Hennepin County or whatever it is, just to add something to it. And I approached it the same way. And then when we were in the midst of it, I tried to structure it the same way. Hey, here's the notes that you need in those first couple minutes. Here's an anecdotal, note. Here's a story on Joey Chestnut that maybe you didn't know, because I know we're going to spend a lot of time with the camera on him. And here's a couple of notes on every competitor, just in case we show them at some point. We need to give you a context on who they are and why they're here. And then in those final moments when you're getting down to it, and we were obviously there covering a potential world record, we just said we started to ramp up the excitement level and say he's closing in on this, and here's the mark that he's looking for. And when he gets there, we're going to make the call. And that's what we tried to do. And that's what I tried to do when we were there to see him set a world record. So we try to make it as familiar as possible to make the job a little bit easier. And that way, if I'm comfortable, I can be myself, and I can call a hot dog championship the way I might call the final out of a playoffs.
And you know what? Chestnut does not believe a hot dog is a sandwich. We actually got in a fight over that once, but that's neither here nor there.
The governing body does call it a sandwich, believe it or not. So it's
I wrote so many blogs on it. I'm very passionate about it.
It rages on.
Yeah. I was 2 vodka sodas deep. We were at a Stanford football game. That's the rest. That's the entire story.
Yeah.
You're obviously associated with one of the most iconic organizations in sports, with the Chicago Bulls. Do you have your own flu game?
Somebody wrote about one, and they said this was Adam Amin's flu game. It was 2016. I was doing it's funny you mentioned Stanford. I was originally scheduled I was doing the Friday night college football package for ESPN that year. And we were originally scheduled to do Stanford and Washington. This is when Christian McCaffrey was at Stanford, and they were really, really good. And it ended up being, week 3 or week 4, something like that game. And it was a big one. It was going to be a top 10 game.
Wow.
And the rest of the ESPN slate that weekend wasn't particularly good. We didn't have that very many games that had a lot of pop to them, a lot of sizzle. So as often is the case when you work in, high level broadcasting, whatever crew on the hierarchy is above you, they might end up getting that game or getting that game assigned. So for a couple of weeks, we're looking forward to this game, and naturally, and rightfully so, I understand why it gets taken away. So we get reassigned to BYU against Toledo in Provo, Utah on a Friday night.
Wow. And
it's myself, Mack Brown, and Molly McGrath. And we're like, all right, well, that's too bad. We didn't get to do the Stanford Washington game. So be it. We'll do this one. We'll do the heck out of this one. So unfortunately for Mac, who would also he'd do Friday night games with me and Molly, and then he'd get on the first flight on Saturday morning to go to New York and be on set for the ABC studio show. And the next day, Texas, Mac's former team, and Charlie Strong were slated to play right around, at the noon ABC slot, the Eastern time slot. So they wanted Mac in studio for that game. And they said, wow, Mac, you better be in that chair, because we got Texas coming up and we need you to talk about it. So Seattle, if we're doing the game in Washington, sure, that's a red-eye flight to Atlanta. You get in about 5 a.m., 6 a.m. flight. You're in New York before 9 a.m., and you're going to be on the air at 11 o'clock for that game. No problem. From Provo, Utah, the last flight out to get to Atlanta is about 1:20 in the morning. That means you have to be at the airport through security by a certain time, probably by 12 o'clock, whatever it may be. So we're thinking Mac may have to leave this game, and we may not be done with it. And the thought process was, well, let's hope and pray that we get kind of a blowout game just for his sake. Maybe there's a couple minutes left and the game's decided and he can slip out the back door, no problem. Well, we get one of the probably 20 best college football games of the entire season. It's 21-21 at one point, and it's a shootout, and it's going to go deep into the night in Provo. And we get to about 11:45 at night, and we are in the middle of like late third quarter, in what is a 1-point game. And I think it's like 42-41. This is a phenomenal college football game. And we've got phones ringing in the truck saying Mack better get his ass on a plane because we need him. So our producer and I have a conversation about it. And we're like, what do we do here? And he's like, well, we can't lie to people because if all of a sudden Mack stops talking, they're going to think he had a heart attack and he's being escorted out of the booth. We got to show that he's okay and send him off. So I was like, all right, let's do it. So we came on camera. We basically said, well, sorry we lose you right now, pal, but we're not going to see your smiling face talking about Texas in the morning if you don't head out right now. So, and Mack was upset. He was legitimately upset about this because he would be insulted if he were a coach of one of these teams.
Totally.
He made it very clear to ESPN, you better make sure these schools know that this was not my decision. And he has far too much integrity to ever let that happen. So I love that man to death. But Mack has to leave. So with 11 minutes left, Molly McGrath and myself are left to our own devices. Molly's on the field and did yeoman's work on that broadcast. Came up huge with great insight, great stories, was right on top of a key penalty that took place late. And I, by myself in the booth, along with my spotter and statistician, Bill Garrity and Ed Svita, who are still my guys to this day, help me through doing this was my Vin Scully homage. This was Vin's last year. This is like late September of 2016. So Vin was about to hang it up, I think, after this particular season. So this was my homage to Vin, doing a solo fourth quarter on a football broadcast. But again, with help and obviously with Molly down on the field. And the game goes right down to the wire. Logan Woodside drops a snap on a 2-point conversion, picks it up and flings it to the end zone. And they get lucky and they get a lead. They take a 1-point lead with less than a minute to go. BYU marches all the way down the field. And Rhett Almond hits a 19-yard field goal at the horn to win the game. And it was written about a couple of years later from one of the Mack writers, the Mid-American Conference writers, and said, that was your flu game. Can I write about that? And I said, all right, that was my flu game.
Love that. That's amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, you handled it beautifully. And that's the jinx, the moment you want it to be a quick game.
Yes. We doomed ourselves as baseball broadcasters and writers. Yes. And anybody in baseball knows as soon as you start talking about the time of the game, that thing is going to go in the complete opposite direction that you're hoping for.
Even with the new rules, I was like, oh, this isn't going to be a long one. And then boom, we have the longest 3-hour and 20-minute game of the season.
Of course.
Adam, you were amazing. Thanks so much for stopping by.
I appreciate you, my friend.
That was my chat with Adam Amin. Everything you could imagine to talk about, we certainly did. I knew he had a flu game. I absolutely knew he had a flu game. We've all been there. I had a broadcast when I had a stomach flu. It was not great. Don't suggest it. But make sure that if he's ever on a broadcast, Mr. Adam Amin, you stop and you listen, because he's one of the types of people where the game is certainly wonderful, but you're always paying a little bit of extra attention to what he has to say. I'm so spoiled that I get to call him my friend, but I'm also spoiled when I see him and hear him over the broadcast. Obviously, I'm very in tune with everything that he does during the MLB playoffs, and he definitely comes as advertised and then some. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to Shorten to the Point on Awful Announcing and The Comeback. Make sure you're following all of our content across those websites. So much good stuff. Just the other day, I realized, wow, we really are covering all of these things. So make sure you are in tune with everything over there, and follow us on YouTube at Awful Announcing. You can search in the search engine. If you have any questions about that, just let me know. Go to YouTube and search. It's not that difficult. I'll see you guys next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.